Okay, so as I said, we've got the headlines here that Brother Andy had submitted about a week ago, and we'll start with the more recent ones that I put up here yesterday. And to get started here, there's some additional supporting articles. There's about 11 of them here. I think some of them are the print version of a video. So that's why you see some headlines, headings there that look like they're duplicates. What I want to get started with here is regarding our first slide here, which is pro-Ukraine Russians bring war to Putin's doorstep. And I want to play a video on that. It's about 7 minutes, and I'll get that going here. Cue that up.
The attention has focused on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and attacks inside Ukraine. But in recent weeks, the war has expanded to attacks inside Russia. Today, the Kremlin reported further explosions and incursions in its homeland as pro-Ukrainian proxy forces step up raids along Ukraine's border. The attacks have been sporadic and shrouded in mystery. Some have struck the periphery of Russia's western border with Ukraine, while others have hit hundreds of miles within Russia. The spillover of Moscow's war inside Russia intensified this week, with pro-Ukrainian groups releasing drone shots claiming to have destroyed Russian military targets. Today, Moscow State TV aired footage of civilians fleeing the Russian border region of Belgorod, where officials reported 2 deaths. Residents described chaotic scenes at the site of an alleged explosion.
We were given 2 hours to get through. We left without things, without anything, without documents. And as we were coming up, we saw the explosion in front of our eyes.
In recent days, Belgorod has come under heavy bombardment. Other attacks have been reported in neighboring Bryansk. But the last month has also seen a spate of unconfirmed incidents far from the front line, targeting oil refineries, pipelines, ammunition depots, and railway junctions. Ukraine says the cross-border incursions are the work of anti-Kremlin Russian fighters. Last month, they seized several frontier towns before withdrawing back to Ukraine. One group behind the raids is known as the Russian Volunteer Corps. Its leader is a notorious Russian nationalist with links to neo-Nazi groups. The second group calls itself the Freedom of Russia Legion, and it fights alongside Ukrainian soldiers under a flag used by Russian opposition groups. Today, a spokesperson for the group outlined its broad aims to liberate Russian territories, but also to divert Moscow's troops.
One of our tactical aims is to draw Russian troops from other parts of the Ukrainian front, to force them to relocate substantial forces from the front lines in Ukraine and get them to protect their borders.
Russia calls the anti-Kremlin fighters terrorists. Today, at a virtual security meeting, Russian President Vladimir Putin alluded to the assaults within Russia and vowed to crush the groups responsible.
Today, we will deal with the security of Russia, taking into account the efforts that our ill-wishers are still making and intensifying in order to stir up the situation inside the Russian Federation.
Meantime, Moscow's military has escalated its aerial assault on Ukraine, this month launching more than 20 waves of attacks on the capital, Kyiv. That carried into today, as residents took shelter in Kyiv's metro, as Ukraine fended off a 6th straight day of bombardments. For more on the attacks inside Russia, why they're happening, and who is conducting them, we turn to Jennifer Caffarella, National Security Fellow at the Institute for the Study of War. Thank you for being with us. And Jennifer, when you look at these attacks, what do you see, and what do you think are the objectives of the groups that are responsible for them?
So there are clearly 2 separate lines of effort, both of which are applying pressure within Russia that does have the potential to make conditions easier for the Ukrainian armed forces as they launch their major counteroffensive, which has not yet begun. The first line of effort are these cross-border raids. What's most remarkable about them is actually the scale to which the Russians are panicking and the scale to which it is, dominating these narratives, which is much larger than the actual raids taking place on the ground, which are quite small and opportunistic. The second line of effort is the deep strikes that it appears the Ukrainians are doing to target supply lines, things like oil depots, and other elements of the resupply that the Russian forces in Ukraine are going to need in order to mount their defense. That second line of effort is much more robust and much more directly supportive of whatever the Ukrainian armed forces are preparing for their next move.
What effects are these different attacks having on Russia and Russia's ability to fight in Ukraine?
The cross-border raids are having the effect of accelerating the panic, essentially, of the Russian forces and of some of those border towns and populations within Russia. And that's an important informational effect, right? It continues to support the broader narrative that not only has Russia not won this war, but it's entirely possible that Russia will lose this war. That's important. So too is the fact that these cross-border raids have started to draw Russian military forces away from front lines and to reinforce those border towns. That's a condition that supports the Ukrainian offensive. Separately, we also are having just broader disarray in some areas with the Russian ability to organize and mount a capable defense. And that disruptive disarray is a key effect that the Ukrainians have achieved time and time again ahead of offensive operations.
Jennifer, how is the Kremlin responding to these attacks?
The Kremlin is reinforcing some of the border areas and trying to signal, essentially, that they're treating this as primarily a threat in the information space. Because again, the actual hard fighting on the ground is relatively limited, but the Kremlin is taking pains to show that its population, that it's taking it seriously and that it will reinforce this area. And what that means is the Kremlin is starting to make hard choices about where to allocate a limited number of assets. And that's exactly where the Ukrainians would want them to be.
How much coordination is there among the groups that are responsible for these attacks and between the groups and Ukraine?
If we're talking about the cross-border raids, not those deeper drone strikes, but the raids themselves, we're not sure. These are actually relatively small groups that are claiming responsibility for these attacks. There's reporting, that links them to the Ukrainian military intelligence. I can't say from, unclassified sources whether that's true or not. All I can observe is that, again, this is a small line of effort, and it certainly doesn't require a significant amount of, Ukrainian support or Ukrainian coordination. So whatever level of contact is there, I expect is minimal. I would also hope that it's minimal, given that some of the groups involved, as was already mentioned, have problematic ideologies and are not the types that we, would like to see supported on the battlefield.
Well, how does Ukraine contend with that, the fact that one of these groups is linked to neo-Nazis?
Well, I think the Ukrainians are in the position we have to keep in mind that this is an existential fight for their ability to survive as a nation and as a people. And I fully expect that there are those within, the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian military and intelligence that see that Putin has domestic enemies, right? And sometimes the enemy of my enemy is my friend in war. I think there's a certain kind of logic to that. These groups did already exist. The Ukrainians, from what we know, didn't create them. These are Russians that desire to fight back against Putin. And what the Ukrainians seem to be doing is exploiting it, at least in the information space, and again, possibly with some small level of contact.
Jennifer Caffarella is the National Security Fellow at the Institute for the Study of War. Thanks so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Okay, so that I apologize for the lack of synchronization there between the voice and the picture. I know it's a little distracting sometimes, but anyway, the narrative is there. You get the picture, and so there's two groups of Russians, not Ukrainians, but two groups of Russians that are fighting on the Ukrainian side in this war in Ukraine, and they are basically substantiating the message that we saw yesterday come from Prigozhin, that had pointed out that there's a possibility of strife, civil strife within Russia. And as we commented last week, Russia may need some tweaking yet to fit in totally with God's plan as the King of the North. But the just as a comment here, the continuing excursions by what appears to be armed Russian dissidents is causing a potential problem for Putin, in that he is being forced to withdraw some of his military to other fronts. and protect Russian towns and villages within range. He has promised the Russian people when he started this war that they would not be affected, and some of them see themselves as being affected, and that is a problem for Putin. Prigozhin, of course, is rubbing in the salt in the wound by announcing that it will be he that will be protecting some of these territories, doing what the Russian military can't. He's announced that he's going into some of these towns and villages that have been targeted. He's going to be doing that today or tomorrow, he announced yesterday. Putin went on Russian TV this past week, as we saw in the clip there, to reassure the Russian population that he would do whatever it took to provide security no matter what. The other problem that Putin faces is exactly what Prigozhin had pointed out last week, which is the developing divide between the elite in Russia and the commoners. In effect, the sons of the commoners are the ones that are out there fighting Putin's war, and some of them regarded as a failing war, and dying by the thousands, while sons of the elite are basking in the resorts on the Black Sea. And that's causing an internal problem. And the problem is that Putin knows only one style of negotiation. That's negotiation by force of might and intimidation. And while the Gog of Scripture has that characteristic, that is the characteristic of negotiation by force and intimidation, there's also the Gog of Scripture also has to have that characteristic of tact and dialogue, which will be necessary, very likely, to get Europe on side, which it needs to be before the invasion on Israel takes place. So, while the might and intimidation are certainly tools, also the tools of tact and dialogue may be necessary. And we quote from Jeremiah 17, that thus saith Yahweh, cursed be the man that trusteth in man, and maketh flesh his arm, and whose heart departeth from Yahweh. And that's what we see as we look out on some of these nations and what's going on. The hand raised at the Richard Hall. Go ahead, please.
Oh, it's Gordon here. I thought we should go back and sort of reconnect with the whole reason we got started with this whole study of signs of the times. Takes us back to the 16th chapter of Revelation. In the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. Verse 13, and I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. For they are the spirits of devils. And I don't know what the original word there is, but I'm guessing it's deceivers, working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. And this is all part of it. What we're seeing happening between Ukraine and Russia, which at least I had assumed Russia would be the king of the north, may still be. We don't know how that's going to play out. And what's happening within Russia points out the fact that there's these influences, which we know as liberty, equality, and fraternity, which are spread throughout the whole earth, which lead to a Babel of disorder, which we know is the state the world affairs have to be in at the end time. And make no mistake, it does affect the ecclesia. because we are influenced by current events and current attitudes. So I think it's really important to connect back to that. And that's possibly why it's a little hard to really understand the details of how this is going to play out.
Brother Sid has a comment here too, brother.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
I think this is a time when a lot of us, we all need to do some thinking to protect our faith. And our faith is an important aspect of our lives. And it could easily be shaken by the way events are shaped as we go forward. We can see a guy like Putin becoming increasingly dangerous because he feels threatened and may go south into Israel in order to bolster support for himself in his own country. But on the other hand, as you say, some of his ways are not exactly matching up with prophecy necessarily. And it could be that Putin is taken out. He loses his power, he loses his ability to carry on the wars that he has started, and that somebody else maybe needs to be put in there. And this could result in a delay of some time in the going forward of prophecy. And so we need to kind of prepare ourselves that these are just steps in a direction, and they are not necessarily the final steps. That we may have to have patience with God's plan, so that we don't feel like things are just simply not working out, but we recognize that they are not working out according to our own expectations. And I think Brother Gordon's comment is very relevant in that as well. That we have to remember that these are influences out there and not particularly forces. And those influences are quite often subtle in their effects on nations for a time, and set more of a direction than necessarily a new goal. We know that God's goal is one and the same all of the time. And so I just think it's good for us to learn to be patient with God's plan and purpose as it unfolds, because it may not unfold just as quickly and directly as we like to see it happen, or as some of the leaders of the nations may like to see their goals unfold.
Just have one quick comment too here, Brother Ed. Trying to like form my thoughts about how, like what I want to say, I guess. Kind of going off of both Brother Gordon and Brother Sid's comments. I think one interesting thing to think about, especially with the three-pronged spirits, is who are the deceivers and who is being deceived, right? So we generally consider the three-pronged spirits coming out of the prophet, the beast, and the dragon, which the dragon we would consider to be Russia, the beast we would consider to be the nations of Europe, and the prophet we would consider to be the church system. So I think we can kind of make a mistake a little bit in thinking that the messages or the narratives that we hear from one part of the kingdoms of the earth is one that's good, you know, it's one that's like on the side of righteousness, so to speak, and the other one's on the side of evil. Where if we think of where it's coming from, it says it's coming from both Europe and Russia and the church system. right? So if you look at the war in Ukraine, for example, it's very easy to assume, oh, like Russia's on the side of evil, right? Because it's the King of the North and Europe is on the side of good because Europe's fighting against and helping Ukraine. But really, it says that the nations of Europe and their messages is one of the false three-frog spirits of democracy influencing the nations to come down to Armageddon, same as Russia and same as the Pope. So I think, you know, it's important to like recenter our minds on the fact that among the messages of that the kingdoms of the earth put out, none of them are on the side of righteousness. All are meant to deceive, to bring the nations to war. And really the only time where we can like make the opposites of those are the messaging of God and the messages of the earth. So that's kind of an important one. And then similar to what Brother Gordon was saying, we don't exactly know how that comes to be. And it might just be so that, you know, sometimes large events on the earth only have small influences on the way that they actually form countries or peoples to come out to how they should be. And one thing that I always think of, and I keep coming back to it again and again and again, is if you look in the original edition of the original Logos edition of Elpis Israel, there's a letter at the beginning that John Thomas sent to the Tsar of Russia in like the 1850s or 60s. So like more than 150 years ago now. And he was saying like the conditions are perfect for Armageddon to happen. It is your prophetical destiny to come and take over Europe, go down into Constantinople, take over Israel. He's like, according to scripture, this is your destiny. And that's kind of the letter that he sent to the Tsar of Russia. And he was like, it's perfect. And there has been times like very close to John Thomas's day where Russia came like very close to actually taking Constantinople. In like the middle of the 1800s, there was a whole bunch of revolutions within Europe, and Russia helped a whole bunch of them. And one of them was the Bulgarian Revolution, I think. And Russia and the Bulgarians came within 12 miles of the walls of Constantinople. They could actually see them in the distance. And so it came like that close to that kind of fulfillment of prophecy. And yet here we are 160 or however many years it is later, still waiting on those things. So despite the fact that the conditions might be perfect, there might need to be big changes that countries need to go through. And this war and things like that might be one of those changes. So it's always important to like look out for, you know, is Russia going to come down to the land? Is that going to be part of their role right now? But also looking forward to how could the events now be shaping the nations for a future where that occurs.
Thanks, brethren, for those comments, all three of you. It's really good, really important. And thanks, Brother Gordon, for linking back to the reason we got started on this. And yes, the spirits of devils are adverse influences is another really good term for spirits of devils. Spirits means influence, and devils is adversity. So it's adverse influences, and where they're coming out of, equality, fraternity, and so on. The three there are good, but also we have to remember that it has to do with politics, religion, and finance. Those three, because the three centers that came out of Constantinople was the politics part of it, Rome was the religious part of it, and Austria was the seat of the financial aspect of the Holy Roman Empire. So those are three other influences that operate on these things, and we'll be looking at all three of these really in if God willing, if we get through our total program here this morning. And also, I guess when we're looking at what has to develop out of this between Ukraine and Russia and China, all three of them really are together in this. Ukraine is Rosh of the Bible, and Russia is the Meshech and Tubal, and China is the Magog. and the Magog that had expanded from China right across to Europe, and of course takes in Germany, but it's a vast area. But that is the seat of Magog, was China. And so we see all three of these players. We don't know yet how this is going to work out, as Brother Austin has commented. We're thinking this could be a war that could be ended here in a year, and maybe Ukraine will come out on top, but it could go on for years, back and forth, until Ukraine, as we see, it's all enveloped into one, or it could become all enveloped in one very shortly. We don't know how all that's going to play out yet, and we just have to, but we know what the Bible says, and it does say that it does include all these nations in one that are currently at war, and including Europe. So there's some tweaking that has to, in my mind, that has to take place here yet, and I think we're seeing that unfolding now before our eyes. So we'll go on to the next one here, and that is artificial intelligence poses risk of extinction, industry leaders warn. And I've got another short clip on this too. And again, I'll apologize for any lack of synchronization between the voice and the picture, but it's about 5 minutes, and I'll just play it for you here.
Are that we, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world. If this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong, and we want to be vocal about that.
OpenAI CEO Sam Altman cautioned Congress about the threat of artificial intelligence just 2 weeks ago. Now, he is one of 350 industry leaders to issue an even more dire warning, saying that if AI is left unchecked, it poses a, quote, risk of extinction. And to be clear, he is talking about human extinction, our extinction. So I want to bring in an old friend of mine, New York Times technology columnist Kevin Roose. Kevin, when we think about AI ending humanity, we picture movies about killer robots taking us down. What exactly does this mean, and how far are we from this scenario?
Well, I wish I knew how far we were from this scenario, because I could be making more progress on building my bunker. But I think the risk here that people in the AI industry and researchers are worried about is the danger that these systems could become, frankly, more intelligent than us, or capable of sort of replicating themselves, of building AI that could then build a better AI, which could build a better AI. And eventually you end up with something that is quite hard for humans to control.
But the people who are now calling for some regulation, they are the creators of this technology. Do we actually believe, do we trust that they want regulation? Because you and I both know all the big social media CEOs have sat before Congress and say, we want good and smart regulation. And then behind the scenes, they spend more money and have more lobbyists than any other industry out there.
Yeah, I mean, these companies clearly want a certain kind of regulation that will not sort of eat too deeply into their ability to make a profit using this technology. But these CEOs actually are quite genuinely worried about this technology. And this is very different than the kinds of talk that we've heard from other tech CEOs. I mean, when Facebook was in its infancy, Mark Zuckerberg was not going around warning that it might kill everyone on Earth. So this is really a different type of technology and a different type of AI risk than the ones that we are used to seeing from other technologies.
Move fast and break things. Was that his tagline? Yeah, well, he certainly did. Now, for the average person out there, Kevin, who does not understand AI, doesn't know what it is, why should this report be something everyone pays attention to? What should they do about it tomorrow?
Well, I don't think the average person can or should do much tomorrow except to start learning about these systems and maybe paying attention to what conversations are happening around it. But I think for regulators, this should be a big wake-up call. I mean, this is an industry that is asking for regulation. Sam Altman has proposed the creation of a sort of international body that could keep track of and sort of monitor AI risk. similar to the organizations that do the same thing for example, nuclear weapons. Other ideas have been floated. Maybe you should need a license to be able to train one of these very large, very powerful AI models. So there are various proposals that are floating around. I'm not very optimistic that any regulation will actually pass, because I saw what happened with social media, where Congress held a bunch of hearings and had a bunch of angry statements and then did essentially nothing to regulate social media. But this is in the air out here in Silicon Valley. People are talking about this kind of risk. And this is very new. Just a few years ago, talking about existential risk from AI was a fringe position, and now it is something more like a mainstream position.
But is there more will on the part of Congress, on government, to do something here than there has been as it relates to social media?
I think there's will, but it's the problem is the technology is moving so fast that by the time you make regulations or pass any bills, it might be obsolete. I mean, a lot of the bills that are being, a lot of the rules for AI regulation that are being considered in, for example, the EU, are based on technology that is now a generation old, and so some of those rules no longer make much sense in a world where the AI systems have just gotten much more powerful and are doing many more things than they were just a few years ago.
There's a new report out from Goldman that says if AI lives up to its hype, 300 million jobs could be lost or diminished. Do you believe that? Because it was just a few years ago when you and I were sitting having conversations that driverless cars were the future and there were going to be no truck drivers anymore and they'd be wiped out. And here we are today with a huge truck driver shortage. Do you really think AI is going to wipe out all these jobs?
Yes, I mean, technology always destroys jobs. That's what it does. It makes certain kinds of work obsolete. The good thing is that it also introduces new kinds of jobs. And so every technological revolution from the Industrial Revolution on, we've had jobs that disappear and jobs that appear for the first time. And the question is, how big is the gap between the old jobs disappearing and the new jobs appearing? And are the people who are displaced out of those old jobs actually going to be qualified and ready for the new jobs that appear?
The latter. That's what we need to solve for. Kevin Roose, it is always good to see you. You know, it is our goal in this show to make people smarter, and you definitely did that tonight. And it's great to see you.
Okay, so this takes us to the financial aspect of the Three Frog Spirits, the quest, the human quest for financial gain, and so on, and how that impacts adversely on the world systems. So this one, basically, we've covered the event, and I just want to recall, if you remember, a few weeks ago we had a slide about artificial intelligence, looking at some of the things it was capable of accomplishing. However, as this article shows, the technology is growing by leaps and bounds, even since we looked at it a couple months ago. And there's been new versions of it coming out. I've subscribed to a couple of them, and I've been kind of following how they've been advancing. And so it's reached a juncture where it is causing now alarm among its developers themselves. As we said, there's a typical human element here, and the element of conflict of interest. There are huge dollar signs with regards to artificial intelligence development and deployment. And while the developers entertain the danger signs and expound on them and seek regulation to govern them, they simply don't want to cease development of artificial intelligence because of the obvious monetary element. In fact, they are scrambling to get ahead of each other, to get ahead of the competition. And there's 3 or 4 artificial intelligence, giants out there that are already advancing by leaps and bounds. The longer Christ remains away, the more we see of the world getting itself into a mess, and this adverse influence of finance is one of the big causes of that. We have a couple of passages we think about here in reference to this. Daniel was told to shut up the words and seal the book even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. And we have Christ's words that men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things that are coming upon the earth. So these are another, just another equation, another quadrant, you might say, of the or triplex of the three. We have a hand raised. Richard Hall, go ahead, please.
Hi, Brother Sid here again. Once again, we have, and that is partly, again, touching base with the beginning of our study of these things, is our faith. And, you know, you look at men's hearts failing them for fear and those kinds of things, and we need to remember that those are not things that on any account we should be experiencing in our own selves. That kind of fear comes from a trust in mankind and not a trust in God. And we are very fortunate, above all people on the face of the earth, to have access to that which bolsters our faith in a time which could prove to be quite difficult for us upcoming, in a temporal sense of the word. And I just looked up a quotation from the Apostle Paul. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. So that is testimony to the steadfastness of God's love toward us, and also a testimony to the fact that there remains but one creature who can separate us from that love, and that is no other creature but what is within our own selves. And so we have a good deal to be thankful for and faithful over, and we have the opportunity to keep an eye on ourselves to make sure that we don't become that other creature, that only creature, and allow ourselves to be separated from the love of God. We have to hold fast and be sure that we do not allow our faith to be shaken. And it may be wise for us to take proactive steps in strengthening our faith in the face of the things that the world is going into, so that we don't get caught out and become discouraged or afraid when we don't need to be.
Brother Gordon has a comment here too, brother.
Okay, thanks.
I'll just put this maybe more in the form of a question, but in the 8th chapter of Zechariah, God's talking about the restoration of Israel. Verse 4, thus saith the Lord of hosts, there shall yet be old men and old women dwell in the streets of Jerusalem, and the streets in the city shall be full of boys and girls playing. And then in verse 9, thus saith the Lord of hosts, let your hands be strong, ye that hear in these days these words by the mouth of the prophets, which were in the day that the foundation of the house of the Lord of hosts was laid, that the temple might be built. I'm going to guess that that is a reference to the future temple of Ezekiel. For before these days, and that's talking about our days, we would think, there was no hire for man, nor any hire for beast. Neither was there any peace to him that went out or came in because of the affliction. for I set all men, everyone against his neighbor. And that seems to be the theme of the news today, where we've got opposition from every angle you can think of. Is that verse 10 a reference to this loss of jobs that might occur before the actual return of Christ?
Well, it's very possible. I certainly agree with you that it does have it's a prophecy of the future and of the time of Christ's return. The setting of it, of course, was the rebuilding of the temple after the exile. So there was that aspect to it also, when they were, having a delay in the rebuilding of the temple and needed to get to work on it. And so there's, as with all things, as with all these prophecies, there's a literal, you might say a literal or an immediate setting or a context of it that has points forward to future fulfillment as well. Okay, the other one, let's see, we've got time here. Yeah, I'm just going to go with we'll just take them in sequence here. Israel, and thanks to Brother Gordon for forwarding this headline here. Israel modifying F-15EX fighters to exterminate Iran's nuclear facilities with GBU-57 bombs. So this takes us to coming up to the fulfillment of these prophecies of Zechariah. We don't know how much longer we have to wait yet, but Israel is there in their homeland, something that our pioneer brethren would have been immensely excited to see if they were living in our day. This is from the Eurasian News, May 27th. So on May 23rd, Defense Forces Lieutenant General Herzi Halavi said, quote, Israel may take action against Iranian nuclear facilities due to possible negative developments on the horizon. Israel has the ability, end quote. In January 2023, the IAEA, that is to do with the International Atomic Energy, detected uranium particles enriched to 83.7% purity. Uranium enriched in 90% purity is considered weapon-grade uranium. Israel made a definite statement in 2021 that if Iran crosses the 60% purity mark, Israel will consider military action. Iran achieved 60% purity in April of that year, breaching the nuclear threshold. However, a successful strike on Iran's nuclear facilities will not be as simple as it was previously in the case of Iraq and Syria, due to two reasons. Number one, Iranian nuclear facilities are in dispersed locations, safely embedded into hills. Secondly, Israel has no weapon to penetrate such facilities embedded in hills. The 30,000-pound GBU-57 is beyond the payload capacity of any current IDF fighter jets. However, the new avatar of the F-15, called the F-15EX, is already under production with advanced avionics. The ECCM suite, which has the ability to take out the avionics of its enemy, and powerful AESA radar. But the most astonishing change in the F-15EX is its enhanced weapon carrying ability. As per Boeing, the F-15EX will be capable of carrying a whopping 29,500 pounds of weapons. This will be the highest weapon load carried by any fighter anywhere in the world. The strategic significance of the modified F-15 variant will be enormous. And I guess I took out a portion of this clip here because of space that described the 30,000-pound GBU-57. It's a bunker bomb, bunker busting bomb the largest in the world, the largest non-nuclear bomb in the world. And it is the only one of its kind that will be capable of busting into the kind of secure setting in which these nuclear developments in Iran are taking place. So then the important significance of this story is that the acquisition of the F-15EX fighter plane will allow Israel to consider and plan a third strike on a nuclear reactor. The first one being Osirak in Baghdad, Iraq, and that was called Operation Babylon, happened in June 7th, 1981. And the second strike on a nuclear reactor in the Syrian Al-Kabar facility, that was Operation Outside the Box, March 21st, 2018. And as I had described, there is a warhead capable of taking out the Iranian facilities, the largest non-nuclear bomb ever, the US GBU-57 weighing 30,000 pounds. But up to now, there was no fighter aircraft capable of the type of mission the IDF would need to carry out, which is flying at night over the desert, under radar, at speeds up to speed of sound or twice the speed of sound, carrying this huge bomb. So now Israel is purchasing this modified version of the F-15 called the F-15EX, capable of carrying the bomb. What comes next will be interesting to watch. And we are in that position where we are able to do that. But whatever the outcome, we know that Israel, back in their homeland, is part of the divine plan with which man cannot interfere with impunity. He says, I will make Jerusalem an intoxicating drink. This is from Zechariah also, that makes the nearby nations stagger when they send their armies to besiege Jerusalem and Judah. I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock. All the nations will gather against it to try to move it, but they will only hurt themselves. That's from the New Living Translation of Zechariah 12, verses 2 and 3. So this is, as we said, it's something that our pioneer brethren would have been very excited to see Israel in their land, and we see we know they're there, and they will not be taken out by any nation around them if it is not in God's plan for that to happen. And I think Israel back in their homeland, they're there until the final event when Christ returns. Okay, so we got another few minutes here, and we'll maybe just see if we can cover our last one here, which is goes to the third part of the frog spirits, that of religion, and its adverse influence in what's taking place in the world today, and particularly in the war between Ukraine and Russia. And this was it's from Reuters, June the 3rd, 2023. The transfer of the holy icon shows Russian Orthodoxy's new sway under Putin. So Putin last month ordered Andrei Rublev's famous Trinity icon be transferred to the Russian Orthodox Church from Moscow's Trekhalov Gallery, which highlights his growing reliance on the church as the Ukraine war drags on. The transfer of Russia's most famous icon, which depicts the Oak of Mamre, where the three angels visited Abraham, and I guess that's where this Trinity label comes from. It underscores the extent to which politics and religion have become intertwined during the war. And a quote here from a theologian and researcher of the Russian Orthodox Church. She says that Putin has an interest in keeping the church on his side in this war to show he respects the church. Putin needs to show that the war is not his personal military activity, but there is a higher metaphysical mission in Russia that he is trying to fulfill. An end of quote there from Regina Eisler. Russia's propagandists have used Christian symbolism about fighting the devil and the Antichrist, to try to rally support for a war that has gone on much longer than the Kremlin or the West expected. Patriarch Kirill of Moscow and all Russia, the head of the church, said believers could only have dreamed that the icon would be returned. Kirill, who is a close ally of Putin's, casts the war a metaphysical battle for Russia's survival against evil and a decadent West seeking to destroy Russia. For some, though, there is unease at the sway of the church. Ksenia Korobinnikova, a Russian art historian, told Reuters the icon's importance to Russia was on a par with Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa for Europeans. And she says, perhaps there is something similar here. The church now has a completely new level of authority. If the church asks for something, then most likely they, the Russian leaders, cannot refuse it. So every so often a news story like this creeps into the usual media dialogue, pro and con, about the Russian-Ukraine war. It serves to illustrate that underlying Putin's usual narrative about the war being a simple military operation, as he often says, is a mission statement shared between Putin and Patriarch Kirill that the war has a ring of morality to it, that it is about right and wrong, good and evil. This also puts the Russian Orthodox Church in collision with the Patriarchy of Constantinople/Istanbul, which is affiliated with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. What would happen at some point in the future if Kirill were to mention to Russian leaders, such as Putin, that Saint Sophia in Istanbul should be cleansed of all non-Orthodox persons attending it, or that the Orthodox Church in Jerusalem needs to be part of the Russian Patriarchate? On the other hand, what has happened to the fierce resistance to icons by the Orthodox Church, which was one of the causes for the original 10th century split from Roman Catholicism? We've got a couple of quotes. I don't know just how applicable they are, but I think they do have some applicability. The king will do as he pleases, we're told in Daniel 11, the 11th chapter. He will worship the god of fortresses, speaking here about the fourth beast dominion in Constantinople, in an affiliation with the Roman church, the Roman bishop. He will worship the god of fortresses, a god his ancestors never knew, and lavish on him gold and silver, precious stones, and expensive gifts. That's from Daniel, and then from Revelation. They repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship idols of gold and silver and brass and of stone and wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. So this is another you might say, link in the chain here of the, at least of the chain of three links between the three frog spirits here: the finance, the religious, and the political, or the military. And we see all of them playing in and having a part in what's happening in the world, and bringing the world to the Armageddon battle. So I don't know if there's any further comment on that. If not, maybe we can meditate on these things and think about them and watch how they play out in the days to come. And as Christ said, when you see these things coming to pass on the earth, you lift up your heads, your redemption draws nigh. So maybe we'll bring our session to a close. We're coming up pretty close to the top of the hour here anyway. And I'll just cut the recording on this.